What's up, college sports fans? I'm Stucky.
I'm Colin Wilson.
I'm Mike Calabrese.
I'm Maria Marino.
I'm Charlie DiSturco, and we're excited that the Big Bets on Campus brand is launching its very own YouTube channel.
You'll be able to find every episode of the BBOC podcast, live shows, and other college sports content on this new channel.
Not only will the channel be dedicated to betting on college sports, but you'll also be able to find exclusive interviews with former college athletes,
college football power rankings,
and updates on other topics like the brand new College Football 25 video game series and the ins and outs of the recruiting trail all the way down to the transfer portal.
Whether you're into college football,
college basketball,
college baseball, or any of the college sports,
we are the home for college sports, and BBOC is the channel for you.
Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the action. I'll see you there.
Welcome into the Action Network podcast. We are presented by our friends at BetMGM. Brendan Glasheen in the host chair. We are just days away from kicking off the 2024 NFL season. If you're looking to participate in any NFL pools this season, this episode is for you because this is our annual NFL pool strategy episode with Action Network expert Travis Reed, and Billy Ward joins us. You might have heard him. You might hear him, present tense, in the summertime with our UFC betting previews. He is part of our predictive analytics team. And, oh yeah, Billy dabbles in the nerfies and the yerfies, and here he is talking NFL pools. So we're discussing strategies around the two most popular types of NFL pools. Those would be survivor pools and pick'em pools. Very excited to dive in. So just to set the scene here, I'll go to you first, Travis. Give the people your background as it pertains to participation in pools.
Yeah, I first started in a survivor pool in college. I think a lot of people kind of do that with their buddies. It's an easy one where you only have to pick one game a week. You don't have to pay a lot of attention. And that's really the appeal to the masses, right? You don't have to go through the whole board. Just pick one team, you're done. So just really got interested there, kind of noticed patterns. Most people just picking the same teams over and over again. And that kind of flipped the light bulb on. It's like, oh, maybe there's something to this, and have been playing them for 20 years ever since. So just really love the contest and all the different strategies that you can implement, and can't wait to talk about some of those today.
Billy, how about yourself?
Yeah, I definitely dabbled in them with a lot of fantasy sports websites. In their app, they'll advertise the survivor pool off to the side, the free entries. So used to do one of those every year, not too seriously. And then in 2020, the COVID season, I actually ended up winning one. So it's been a little bit more serious for me since then. Still chasing that dream of lasting the whole season. Obviously harder now with the 18-week schedule. That was one of the last 17-week seasons. But yeah, that's been my real big interest in the last 4 or 5 years.
Very nice. Okay, there you go. So there's the background you need on Travis. Billy, again, we're discussing two of the most popular, and we're going to hit on Survivor as well as Pick'em. So let's start Survivor. How long, Travis, is an average entry expected to last in survivor pools?
So I was looking at some of the data. On average, less than 50% make it to week 4. So this idea that you're just going to, that you even need to play it safe early to get later into the season is kind of a fallacy. Most of the teams are going to get knocked out early anyway. So it's more about, at least personally, I'd rather have some of that future value, save some of those good teams for later if you do make it past those first few weeks, because that's the weeks we know the least about any of these teams. We think we know which teams are good, but when you look back at week 1 lines by like week 10, we're like, what the hell were we thinking? So these are the weeks where we know the least. So if you can get through that and have some good teams left standing, that's going to really increase your odds of winning down the road.
Billy, do you have any? You don't have to necessarily answer that question directly how it's asked, but more so just early, as far as an expected entry, survival of the fittest, what your mindset is when it comes to those first few weeks, kind of what Travis was hitting on. Anything to add there?
Yeah, no, he makes a really good point, and I was going to touch on it a little bit later about the teams we think should be big favorites in week 1 or week 2 often are not. And then just to add on to his answer a little bit, most of the time we see less than half the field make it through to week 4. But that really heavily depends year to year, because there's always a couple teams in those few weeks that 50-60% of the field is on in one of the early weeks. Obviously, when they lose, that takes out a big chunk. So there's a lot of variance year to year just based on how well heavy favorites perform. But most years at least one big favorite drops their game in the early weeks, and that's why we see that less than 50% advance rate.
Travis, as it pertains to finding the appropriate components when you're putting together a strategy, especially early in the year, what are some of the important components to consider when you are making your decisions in Survivor?
Yeah, so there's really three key ones. Obviously, this week's win probability, whether that's just looking at the lines, whether you want to use, part of our team and look at what our projections say. The next one is future value, which is more art than science, because obviously we don't know about the chaos of injuries and things like that. A lot of teams you may think have future value, then their quarterback goes down and now they have none. So that always gets a little bit tricky. But the third one is looking at how often that team is being picked. And a lot of these sites will show you that data. So you can just Google, okay, what are the Survivor picks this week? And look at those popular ones. Billy mentioned it. You'll see a 10-point favorite has 50% of the picks on it. Not every week, but one of these weeks, that team's going to go down and that huge chunk of the pool is out. You don't want to be fallen by the wayside with the masses. You want to try to steer clear of those types of teams. So putting all three of those data points together to try to make the best decision is usually where I start.
Mm-hmm. Well, week one, there's only one game that has a touchdown or greater spread, and that would be New England at Cincinnati. And the Bengals, never mind Joe Burrow coming back from an injury, but the Bengals with Joe Burrow, even when he's been healthy, they've started slow. I believe they're 1-3 straight up in Burrow's 4 years. In week one, they've kind of had wonky starts to their season since Burrow's been drafted and their quarterback. Billy, how about yourself when it comes to things you're considering, components when you're trying to put together a strategy for Survivor?
Yeah, the other big one that Travis didn't get to is just the size of the pool. And by that, I mean both how many we started with and how many are still remaining. If it's you and one other guy in week 12, it's probably okay to just take the, the heaviest favorite on the slate if you still have them available. When you're in a, massive one offered by a, huge website with 5,000 people, you should almost never take that 50% utilized team. So keeping that in mind, just the size of the pool, whether you expect anyone else in the pool to make it the whole week. And then if you can see this, sometimes you can't, depending on where you're playing, what teams your opponents have selected. Once you get down to, single digits or a dozen or so people in your pool, you can kind of guarantee yourself a little bit of an edge just by selecting teams that they've already used. So what your opponents are doing is a big factor in there, especially once it gets smaller. And then at the start of the season, if you're in a pool of 1,000 plus people, someone's probably going to make it all 18 weeks. That's usually about the rate, is 1 out of every 1,000. If you're in a smaller pool, you don't need to focus on making it every week. You just need to beat the people in your pool. So that can make it where it's a little bit more valuable to be contrarian, not worry about that future value so much. Just try to pick teams that the rest of the field isn't on.
Yeah, in a week to week mindset, Billy, I would imagine there are some parallels to like daily fantasy, right? When it comes to like ownership percentages and whatnot, you want to be a little bit different.
Yeah, I think of it the exact same way, and we'll even talk about this with the pick'em pools in a little bit. But if everyone in our pool plays the same guy in DFS or picks the same team in Survivor, even if they win or you advance, you've gained nothing, because the goal isn't to survive all 18 weeks necessarily. It's to survive the longest out of everyone that you're playing against. So beating the field and having the best possible outcome are not always the same answer, which you need to keep in mind.
Travis, one thing that you've always preached in Survivor is that you have to gain equity each week if you're serious. If you want to take home the pot, and as you both mapped out, there are varying kinds of pools, Survivor pools that you'll get yourself involved in. So explain what you mean by that when you have to gain equity each week.
Yeah, it's similar to the point Billy just made. You're really looking to gain leverage on your opponents. So if you start off in a 100-man contest, you basically start out with 1% equity. Your goal would be to eventually get to 100% equity. So the best way to do that is to maximize your entries and minimize all of your opponent's entries. So that's going to really kind of push you away from those teams that are 30-40% taken, and really try to just gain that edge each and every week. And one of the things Billy mentioned was it also gets you onto different teams almost without even trying, because you avoided that chalk early. Now you have those teams later. It basically kind of snowballs where you get to keep avoiding chalk because those teams don't have them. So you continuously have options available to you that the rest of the field does not.
Billy, when you get involved in a survivor pool, what are some of the rules you're looking at? Like, depending, of course, on the pool, but what rules kind of stick out to you when you're trying to get a sense of finding an edge?
Yeah, the biggest one that I see that actually changes from pool to pool is whether a tie counts as an advancement or not.
Yeah.
I was looking back at some past years' data. I forget what team it was. I want to say it was like the Colts, who were massive favorites, or maybe they were massive underdogs, and they tied in week 1. And if you had a pool where ties advanced, your pool was still like 90% alive. And if you had a pool where ties didn't count, it took a big chunk out because they were the most popular team. So that's one you definitely want to be aware of. Most stuff is pretty standard across weeks, unless you're playing in a weird one where you get one chance to come back in, or some make you pick 2 teams late in the season if there's still a bunch of people. Those are always good to be aware of. For the most part, I don't see too many like providers who use those rules. So the tie is the big one, I think, that might actually change depending on where you're playing.
Travis, anything to add as far as rules that you keep a close eye on when you're getting yourself involved?
Yeah, more so looking at the payout structure.
Yeah.
Some of them are winner take all. So that one, you obviously you have to make it the furthest. So that can change, especially getting into those later weeks. If it pays out top 10, top 50 or whatever, that can change. Also, how many entries can you do? If you're spending if you're listening to this, want to spend $100, I'd rather get into a $10 with 10 entries than one $100 entry. So that's just, looking at, I really want to maximize the amount of entries I can put into any one pool, whether that is a single entry or if, you can put in 20. I think that's one of the rules that you can take advantage of. Because we were talking about earlier, you can really kind of spread around your teams. And if one of those, 30%, 40% favorites goes down early, you have a lot of shots on goal later throughout the season.
Okay. So you just hit on what we were going to hit next, which is speaking to the rules aspect when you consider number of entries. And you said, all right, I'd rather have $10 entries. And that, of course, relies on what your structure is and what is allowed and what isn't. Billy, anything to add there as far as the number of entries that are optimal for Survivor?
Yeah, I'm not sure there's necessarily like an optimal answer here, because
Okay.
obviously if you do 10 entries instead of 1, you need to win it 10 times more often to pay that off, like over a long period of time. I like having like 2 or 3, just so I can have one where it's like, hey, I just want to keep playing. It's supposed to be fun, right? It's supposed to keep us engaged. We know that 50% or so of lineups are done in week 3. That's not a ton of fun. So I'll have one where I try to play it a little bit safer just to give me something to root for. If you get to week 10 or whatever, and you're one of the last few, great, you play it out. And then another one where I'm very intentionally trying to be contrarian, hoping for those big favorites to fail, just because you might in weeks 3 or 4 be down to the last handful of percentage of people. So I don't think there's a right answer there. It also depends on how much time and energy you want to devote to this. Many of us are busy with fantasy lineups and DFS and bets and other stuff during football season. So I know personally I can't manage 10 entries. Like, I'll forget who I use,
Yeah,
where
that's
they
fair.
are, what sites I'm on. If you can do that, it's probably a good thing if you can do it well, but I'd rather do a couple well than 10 kind of poorly, personally.
One topic that I think is fascinating as it pertains to pools, Survivor pools, is making the choice to be risky when risk is appropriate. And you've both sort of hinted at it, where you might take how you might answer this question. Travis, when is the right time to take bigger risks?
Yeah, it kind of just depends on what the slate gives you every week.
Right.
But my initial answer was just early and often, because that's when, like we said, most of the time you're going to lose in those early weeks anyway. So I'd rather just, fade some of those favorites, take those risks early. Now, as far as like, I've done some where you get into week 11, week 12, and you take like a 3-point dog, and then that's where you just kind of, you kind of almost get backed into a corner. And so that's sometimes you also have to take that risk of, I know I'm really lowering my chance of advancing this week, but if I can save these teams for the next 3 weeks, I might be able to win this whole thing. So I think that's another time where you might sacrifice this week, but if you can make it, it really ups your chance to win the entire pool. That's another time to take a big gamble.
Depends on the slate, depends on how everyone else is doing, right? Who has what as far as teams available to them. Billy, your thoughts on risk and when it's appropriate?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that the best time is early. Just it's uncomfortable taking some of these not that big favorites in week one. But as Travis mentioned earlier, these teams, we're going to look back and think they should have been 2 touchdown favorites anyway. So the risk you might think you're taking in week one might not end up even being that big of a risk. And then once you get 2, 3 weeks, whatever, of somewhat contrarian picks, I like to play safe through that middle part because we've already set ourselves up to have different teams at the end, as Travis mentioned. And then again, on the other end, hopefully that leaves you with some heavy favorites that other teams don't have. Other thing I want to point out, if you're down to, a handful of other entries that might only go 1 or 2 more weeks, it's a really good time to take the money line, bet the money lines of the teams against the one you're going with. You can lock in some profit that way if you make it to those later weeks, just by knowing that if this team wins, I advance. If they lose, at least I get paid out that way. So that makes me more comfortable with taking risk at the end, just because I have a way to profit off my success so far, even if I don't actually cash the survivor pool, assuming you're in a legal betting state and all those other good things.
Good stuff. Pools introduce a psychological component too. And you can study based on if you're with your buddies, you're with maybe coworkers from Action Network that you consider them smarter than your friends. Maybe not. I don't know. You guys don't have to speak on that. I'll leave that up to yourselves. But predicting pool behavior and what you're expecting, trying to get a sense of what your opponents, your other fellow participants are going to do over the course of a season. What kinds of trends, Travis, have you noticed in your time doing this? It can be early in the year. You can give any scenario you'd like, but examining pool behavior and what sometimes often happens that you want to keep in mind. So help the audience when it's week 7 or whatever, they're out of those first few weeks. Some behavioral trends that can be kept in mind.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times it's as simple as they're going to flock to either the biggest favorite on the board or like a really bad team that's a favorite. So a team that's like 3-9, but happens to be like a 3 or 4 point favorite. They're like, oh, this is my one chance to use this team.
Probably against another bad team, right?
Right.
It would be a 3-9 against a 1-10,
yeah,
right? Or
right,
11.
exactly. And everyone will look at that as, oh, well, this is my free space to finally get to use this team and move on to the next week. And it looks good. But if everybody's piling on that same team, it's kind of what we talked about earlier. Well, now it's time to look at different direction.
I'll give you the game. It's going to be Patriots at Titans on November 3rd, and the Titans are going to be favored.
Yeah,
that's the game.
Yeah, exactly. That's the exact scenario.
November 3rd, just to paint the picture. Like we're 2 months into the season at that point.
Right. I'll be shocked if that's not like a Thursday night game and everybody's like, all right, here, we'll just go ahead and lock it in.
It's
early.
not 1 o'clock window.
No
one will. It will be the 4th or 5th CBS crew on that game.
But
it's actually on Fox. Sorry, the 4th or 5th Fox crew.
There we go.
Anyway.
But yeah, it'll be a situation like that. I was actually just looking at any picks already for week 1, and you mentioned it. 40% of the picks are already on Cincinnati. So I mean, if you're in a pool with just like some of your friends and things like that, you can probably bank on a lot of them going with the biggest favorites, especially early. Mm-hmm. And then another thing to keep in mind is if you're in a pool with a bunch of friends, you're all fans of the same team. They are generally going to think higher of that team than the market does. And so you can use that to your advantage as well.
Billy, thoughts on pool behavior and things through your experiences, you keep in mind, and when you can project what your other participants might be thinking or what they're going to scheme up.
Yeah, other than the real like high dollar super sharp ones, I don't think that most people playing these even give a second thought to what the competition is doing. They're just, I'm trying to pick a winner every week. It's not that hard. I just have to pick one winner. That's the logic of most people going in. So if you're on a site where you can see your other players' picks, that's super helpful because you can then use that to just pick against them. If they're not, then you need to think about some of the things that Travis said. You can kind of use public data that other sites offer to guesstimate where people are going to be. But yeah, the biggest one, I think, it's just most people are so hyper focused on just surviving to the next week, they don't consider trying to gain equity or get leverage or stuff like that, which you can use to your advantage.
Before we move on to pick'em pools, I have a question. You both might think it doesn't matter one bit. I'm just curious because, like in week 1 this year, we're gonna have a Friday night game after the Thursday night opener, Kansas City against Baltimore. Do either of you have thoughts on like primetime games or those stay away spots for you guys? Like we'll get to Thanksgiving down the road. I'm just curious if that plays any part into your thinking. Or do you feel like there's like bad juju with primetime games? Because there's more when there's not even primetime, but standalone games where there's just more. You can identify sharper action, I think, on a game, right? For like from a sports betting perspective. Travis, anything there?
I don't have any of those rules. I think that actually
Okay.
limits a lot of players. I've seen people say, "Oh, I'm never taking a road team. I'm never taking either team in a divisional game because those are always tighter."
Good one.
Things like that. Like all that's usually baked into the win probability already. So all of that is already factored in. So I think when you try, if you do that, you're probably limiting your options too much. So I would just avoid any of those hard and fast rules of, oh, well, you can't take this team because of X. So I wouldn't
Okay.
do that.
Yeah, but and Billy, I think that's something that you can that kind of lends into the discussion of pool behavior. Maybe someone like me. I'm giving you myself as an example. Maybe I'm thinking that way, admittedly.
Yeah, I love what Travis said, that once you have a hard and fast rule, it's probably going to do more harm than good. The one thing I will say is I try to avoid Monday night games when I can, and you'll hear in a second why, and that this is a guy who won during the COVID season and why I'm saying that. But on a Monday night game, if Patrick Mahomes, falls off a bridge and can't play, you can't switch. You can only switch to their opponent. You might not have the opponent available. If you have a Thursday game and something happens or there's injuries, you have plenty of time to react. So it costs you in both ways, because if you're locked into that Monday team and a big favorite opens up on Sunday because a quarterback is ruled out or whatever, you miss that opportunity. But also, if something bad happens or there's horrible weather that might slow down an offensive team, key players getting hurt, the whole team testing positive for COVID and using like a ninth string quarterback, any of those situations, obviously that one's not going to happen anymore, but you have less flexibility with the Monday game than you would otherwise. That matters more late in the year because you have less teams available and because injuries and all those things pile up throughout the season. So keep that in mind. Like, it's not something I will hard and fast avoid, but if I have a tiebreaker and I'm kind of equal on both teams, I prefer to get them in as early as possible just to give me that optionality to change.
That's an interesting dynamic, though, thinking about Monday. Is there might not be as much
Sunday night, same thing. You only got one other game to go. The later, the harder it is, obviously.
Yeah, right. And the availability of news, and you might get news on the Monday game as the Sunday 1:00s get going, right? Just based on the timing of when players get ruled out or whatever the case, right? Or maybe they'll be on a snap count, if you will. Good stuff. All right, let's move on. So there's your survivor pool breakdown from Travis and Billy. Let's head over to pick'em pools. Most are styled after the original Westgate Super Contest, where participants pay a substantial entry fee before the season, and then you select 5 games against the spread each week. And the allure is very clear. You just pick 5 games against the spread and have the greatest season of your life, and you win over $1 million. That's ultimately what we're looking at. That's the dream. Travis Reed, what is the biggest mistake pick'em pool players make when entering an NFL pick'em contest? What is the correct approach in your eyes?
It definitely mirrors what we talked about with Survivor Pool, and they're just looking at their entry and not paying attention to what everyone else is doing. Like you said, if your plan is to just sun run, hit 70% of your picks and win them all, then yeah, sure, that's a great plan. That's a very, very hard thing to do. Good luck. The other way to do it is to see or have a feel for what other players are picking and try to take advantage of that. A lot of these pools use stale lines, so it may be -2.5 in the pool. Then there's an injury or a quarterback change. Now the line's up to 5.5 or something like that. You can bet that most of those people are going to take that -2.5 now because, oh, look at all this closing line value that I'm getting. But now you have to think of, is that pick actually gaining anything on the field? Is it even worth it to take the opposite side of that, and kind of doing some of those projections and figuring out, okay, when's the right time to either A, just stay away from that game completely, or B, maybe you're behind after a few weeks. That's a good time to, all right, I'll just take this plus 2.5. I know it's uniquely minus EV in this one game, but if it does win, it gains a lot against the rest of the field.
Mm. Yeah, Billy, I would imagine monitoring CLV is something a lot of players will do, right? If the slate comes out and the lines are established by Thursday morning, so people can use the Thursday night game, well, then those lines are locked through Monday, and then it kind of transitions well from what we were just talking about with those standalone spots Sunday night, Monday. But maybe that makes me a bad pick and pool player. I don't know. You tell me. What's the correct approach in terms of wanting to finish first and win the whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is just like we were saying with survivor pools, and just like you alluded to with DFS being the comparison, the goal isn't to score as many points. The goal is to score more points than your opponents, right? Like, you're not trying to solve for what optimizes how many I get right. If you could actually just pick 70% right, don't play these pools. Just go bet all the money you have, split out over every NFL game, and cash a huge return every year, right? You're a genius. You're the best bettor in the world if you can do that.
Yeah, go beat the book.
Anyway,
Don't beat your
so, like,
friends. Go beat the book.
right, exactly. Yeah, like that one, if you can really hit 70% consistently year over year, you don't need to be doing this anyway. To your point on the timing though, and this is one where the rules and the format vary greatly from operator to operator, because I have played some where the lines come out Wednesday evening or Thursday, and you can lock in your picks, but then you can change at any point, and then when you change, it gives you the new line. So you can lock in Lions -2. As long as you keep that, you get that -2. If they go to -6, and you change, then it becomes -6. So that is really important. If you're in one where you can lock in but then change and the lines move with you, as soon as they come out, pick 5 teams. Kind of doesn't matter who. If you think there's an injury situation that might have a big impact, jump on those because they're more likely to move. The only success I've ever had doing this is under that format where I would just grab 5 teams like the minute they dropped. If I got CLV on it, great, because unless someone else was doing what I'm doing, they're not getting that same line, and then you can get an edge on people if it falls between those 2 numbers. So that is important, and goes back to what we were saying about the Monday night games. That optionality of being able to pivot when news breaks and stuff is huge. Again, depending on the format, are the lines locked in, or are they going to move when you move your picks? That's a big factor.
Mm-hmm. And that speaks to the same things you both emphasize with Survivor. Know the rules of the pools you're getting yourself involved in. It may not be obvious in pick'em pools, but the ideal strategy for winning a weekly prize in a pick'em pool can be very different from the strategy to try and win the season-long prize. Travis, does a pick'em pool player have a choice to make between striving for weekly or season-long prizes?
They can, and especially later in the season, it's easier to know. It's like, okay, I'm probably not going to win the season long, so I can go for either the weekly, or sometimes we'll have a monthly or quarterly type contest to kind of keep people interested that are already out of it. But early on, I'm still going to focus on the season long. It may, if it distracts enough people to go for that weekly or monthly contest, that's actually good for you. So you can continue on your way to try to win that big prize. Like you said, we're not trying to do this to win the monthly prize or the weekly prize. You're trying to get that big prize at the end. So I'm going to try to do everything I can to try to win that one.
What about you, Billy? Deciphering the weekly prizes that might be available to a player or the season-long prize?
Yeah, to elaborate a little bit on what Travis said, if you're just trying to solve for winning that weekly or monthly prize, then you just take the spot where you got the most line value or the heaviest favorite that you can get at a better price, whatever. Obviously, that much of the field is going to be on that, which makes them not an optimal pick to get leverage on the rest of the field. With that said, usually the monthly or quarterly or whatever prizes are relatively insignificant compared to, even the 10th place finish or whatever in the big one. So I mostly avoid those until late in the season when I'm inevitably so far out of first place that it's the only thing you got left to play for.
Either of you, any other tips, suggestions that we haven't covered for pick'em pools, Travis?
One thing you can do, I've noticed a lot of people like to kind of flaunt that they're in these content, you can actually just search on like X or Twitter, like like a hashtag or something, and see a lot of people's picks and get a good idea of what kind of the popular picks are that way, because they're really hard to find, especially like if you're in like the super contest or something like that. You can search for those and find quite a few people, maybe they're media members or something like that, that are trying to, I guess, brag about being in this, and kind of get an idea, okay, that's probably what the public's going to be on as well. And that'll give you kind of a leg up of, okay, now how can I take advantage of this information?
So, Billy, what Travis is saying is when he listens to the UFC betting preview and we find out who Drake's betting, right?
Same deal.
Well, Drake's got some sway, you know? That's kind of what he means, I guess. I mean, he's not a media member, but, you know, he's got some pull.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add is
I'm using Drake as an example, Billy, to
Right, yeah.
amplify the conversation. That's all. It's a personal
Yeah,
example.
the metaphorical Drake, right? The Drake that
Yeah.
exists in our hearts, not the actual Drake. But no, the only thing I'd add is we've talked a lot about trying to be contrarian and trying to make unique picks. One unique feature of the pick and pools, though, is if you are up or even in the top 10, if you're at a position where you'd be very excited with the amount of money you won if you finished there, you want to do the exact opposite of being contrarian. You want the same picks as everyone else, because if I'm in first place and Travis is 1 point behind me, the perfect scenario for me is we have all 5 same picks. Whether they all win or lose, he can't catch me. So that's just something to keep in mind. It doesn't have to be first. You know, some of the 10th, 20th, whatever place payouts are pretty significant relative to the buy-in. So once, you know, about halfway through the season, if you're in a position where you'd be happy with the payout based on your current standing, the logic totally flips on its head, where you want to mirror the field as much as possible so people can't catch you.
Excellent point. Very good point. I found myself in that scenario last year personally. I know the audience doesn't care, but I'm glad you brought that up because I think a lot of people can relate to that in their experiences with pick and pulls. One more specific,
have, of course, you know.
Oh yeah, very much so.
Right.
One last thing, and it relates to getting uncomfortable, taking risks, as we discussed in the Survivor breakdown. Most people hate to bet bad teams, right? Like last year we had so many quarterbacks playing on these different teams. I forget the exact number, but the amount of quarterbacks that saw time in an NFL game was pretty disgusting. Like there were weeks I remember betting or throwing in one of my 5, having Carolina in there, even New England. Carolina at times actually was okay. New England was not. Any thought there, Travis, on just being comfortable with picking a crap team?
Yeah. So the way
that almost has to happen, I think, if you want to separate from the pack, one way or the other.
Oh, for sure. I was plugging in Jake Browning's first start last year. I was like, all right, let's do it. I think one thing that helps psychologically is just as soon as you enter the contest, assume that money is gone. You have already lost it. That's the most likely result anyway. The thing you want to do is win every, X years. But for the most part, you're going to lose most of these contests. Oh, there's only, a few winners every year. So if you just think about, okay, well, I've already lost this money anyway, I might as well shoot the moon and go for it. That kind of helps take these teams that look disgusting. You're like, there's no way they're ever going to keep this close, and just kind of follow the math and just plug your nose and take them anyway.
Okay. Anything to add there, Billy? And I'm thinking, I mentioned the Patriots and the Titans when they play the first week of November. That could be disgusting. I mean, who knows what the Giants, they seem to already hate Daniel Jones. We're recording this 2 weeks before opening night, or just about 2 weeks before opening night. So I know we have some time here for more storylines to develop, but I mean, quarterback play. I'm really hitting. That's the key to the whole thing. We know quarterbacks move lines, whether they're in or out, and have an effect on the spread. Some more important than others, understandably. So here's just your thoughts there on the risks involved of you're going to have to pick some bad teams that are probably getting more than a touchdown. I should add, right? You're getting points, which makes it more comfortable, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, broadly speaking, the NFL point spread market is one of the most efficient markets in the world, even when we look at, financial markets and stuff like that. So I don't really care about the team. I don't think that deep about it, because if you're getting plus 10.5 and the market thinks that's about what it's going to fall at most of the time, have you figured out a way to get CLV? Is there a chance somebody gets hurt and moves that? Those are the things I'm looking at, not so much the team quality overall, because again, I personally believe that the NFL point spreads in major markets are pretty much what they should be. So once you get that out of your head, it doesn't really matter what the name next to the number is. It's just the number.
Mm-hmm. I think that's worth bringing up though, because it reminds folks, where you could say you're in a situation though, where you're on the outside looking in of placing to earn a prize. Get a little uncomfortable. And I liked what you said. I think Travis said it, or maybe it was Billy. I forget. You both sounded the same when you said this, that when you invest your $100 or whatever it is, just pretend it's gone. Who said that?
That was me.
That was you. Okay.
I appreciate you
just
paying
said
attention.
that.
Thanks.
Okay. Hey, come on, you're going back and forth and processing a lot of information here. So thank you for clarifying who said that. Okay, there you go. There are your pool breakdowns here on the Action Network podcast, your survivor pool strategy and pick'em pool strategy. Billy Ward, Travis Reed, you can find their work. Travis Reed over at Bet Labs, as well as Action Network. Billy Ward does a great job covering football and other sports over at Action Network, actionnetwork.com. Find those guys in the app as well, with football season right here. Be on the lookout for more NFL episodes leading up to week 1, plus our full lineup of weekly NFL episodes this season, including our NFL betting preview with Stuckey and Raybon. They have reunited. They just did one of their first shows this past week, so they're shaking off the cobwebs. They're ready to go. And we will have NFL Best Bets episodes returning every Friday morning, first thing. We'll get those out to you before the weekend, once the season kicks off. For Travis Reed, Billy Ward, Brendan Glasheen, thanks again for listening. We'll see you here next time on the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM.